Jack Bartlett's will has just been revealed, and it's shaken Heartland to its core. What was meant to be a final act of love has instead set off a storm of anger, confusion, and betrayal. Tim and Lou expected Jack's last wishes to honor their place in the family, but what Jack actually did left them stunned. So, what choice could the man who held this family together make that would spark such fury? Jack Bartlett wasn't just the head of Heartland Ranch, he was the heart of it. For years, he stood as the anchor in a family that had faced tragedy, hardship, and endless challenges. He was the man who gave guidance when tempers flared, who offered wisdom when choices seemed impossible. Everyone around him looked to Jack, not only as a father and grandfather, but as the one who would always put the family first. That's why the reading of his will became such a heavy, unforgettable moment. It wasn't just paperwork, it was Jack's final voice, the last chance for him to speak to those he loved most. Sitting in that quiet room, Lou and Tim believed they already knew what was coming. Lou, the daughter who had worked tirelessly to protect Heartland's future, expected Jack to acknowledge her devotion. Tim, for all his flaws and his turbulent past, hoped to finally hear that Jack believed in him, that he was worthy of carrying the family legacy. But when the lawyer began reading Jack's words, silence fell over the room. The weight of every sentence pulled harder than the last. Instead of comfort, Jack's decisions left questions. Instead of reassurance, his words planted doubt. It wasn't the clear, simple distribution of land and assets they imagined. It was something more complicated, something that shook their sense of belonging. Lou shifted uncomfortably, her face pale with disbelief. Tim clenched his jaw, his pride already burning with anger. Jack, the man they trusted to see them both, had made choices neither of them could have predicted. The air grew tense, almost suffocating, as the realization sank in. Jack's will was not what they expected. And in that single moment, the Bartlett family found themselves standing at the edge of a storm they never saw coming. The room fell still as the lawyer's voice carried Jack's last words. His tone was calm, almost too calm, as if he didn't notice how every line cut deeper into the hearts of the family sitting before him. Lou leaned forward, her hands gripping the arms of her chair, desperate to catch each word. Tim sat stiff, his eyes narrowing, a storm already building behind them. Jack's will was not a simple division of land and money. No, it was layered with choices that felt more like messages than instructions. Heartland Ranch, the land Jack had poured his life into, was not left to Lou as she always assumed. Instead, Jack's words shifted the responsibility elsewhere, to someone she never expected. Lou's heart sank, not because of greed, but because this ranch had been her fight, her purpose. She had believed Jack saw that. And yet, here he was, entrusting it to another. Tim's head snapped up when he realized what had just been said. His chest tightened, his fists curling against his legs. For years, he had been clawing his way back into Jack's trust, proving he was more than his mistakes, more than the man who walked away when things got hard. In his mind, this was his chance for redemption, for Jack to finally say, "I believe in you," but instead, the will handed him almost nothing. It was as if Jack's silence was louder than words, leaving Tim with nothing but the sting of rejection. The lawyer continued, unfolding detail after detail, each one adding to the confusion. There were unexpected names written into Jack's will, people who weren't in the room, gifts that seemed symbolic rather than practical, choices that didn't line up with what Lou or Tim thought they knew about Jack. Every new revelation was like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit, leaving the family wondering what Jack's true intentions had been. By the time the final page was read, the atmosphere was thick with disbelief. Lou sat frozen, her mind racing, while Tim's anger boiled so close to the surface it threatened to erupt. Jack Bartlett, the man who had always brought them together, had now through his final words driven a wedge so deep it might tear the family apart. Tim's silence didn't last long. The lawyer's words were still hanging in the air when his chair scraped back against the floor. His jaw was clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. For a man who had spent his life fighting in rodeo arenas, fighting against his own demons, fighting for a place at Heartland, this moment felt like the hardest blow of all. In his mind, memories flashed like lightning. He saw himself as a young cowboy, wild and reckless, chasing glory while leaving responsibility behind. He saw Jack's disappointment, the way the old man had looked at him after every mistake, every bad choice. But he also remembered the second chances, Jack letting him back in, giving him work on the ranch, trusting him with family moments even when trust was fragile. Tim believed he was earning his way back, piece by piece. And now Jacksville told a different story. In Tim's eyes, it wasn't just about land or money. It was about respect. It was about finally being seen as more than a failure. Instead, Jack's decision felt like a final judgment, a permanent mark that no matter how hard Tim tried, he would never measure up. His voice broke the silence, sharp and bitter. So that's it. That's what he thought of me. The words cut across the room like a whip. Lou flinched, her own hurt mixing with his anger, but Tim wasn't looking at her. His fury was aimed at a man who wasn't even there to answer. Every muscle in his body trembled with the weight of emotions he couldn't control: anger, grief, betrayal, shame. He wanted to yell, to break something, to demand that Jack explain himself. But all he had were the words on paper, cold and final. No argument, no fight, could change them. And that was the cruelest part for Tim. Jack had always been the one man whose approval mattered more than any trophy, any paycheck, any applause. And in this last act, Jack had taken it away from him. Forever. Lou didn't explode like Tim. She didn't raise her voice or storm out of the room. Instead, her pain was silent, like a slow crack spreading through glass. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, but her eyes told the truth. They shimmered with disbelief, with a sadness so heavy it seemed to press her shoulders down. For Lou, this wasn't about pride. It wasn't even about wealth. Heartland had been her life's work. She had fought to keep it running, balanced the books when times were tight, argued for every small decision that kept the ranch alive. She had carried Heartland on her back like it was her duty, her promise to Jack, her way of showing love. And she had done it believing, deep in her soul, that Jack saw her, that he trusted her, that when the time came, he would hand her the keys to the legacy she had worked so hard to protect. But Jacksville told a different story. As the lawyer's words echoed in her ears, Lou felt like the ground had shifted under her feet. It was as though her father had looked straight through her years of sacrifice and chosen someone else to hold what she had guarded so fiercely. She wasn't angry the way Tim was. She was hurt, a quiet, aching hurt that whispered in her mind, "Was I not enough?" Her thoughts spiraled back to moments she cherished: Jack walking with her across the ranch at dawn, giving her advice, telling her she had what it takes. She remembered how proud he had looked when she stepped up to lead, how he had leaned on her during the toughest decisions. Those memories now twisted into questions. Were they lies? Or worse, were they true in the moment but not enough to shape his final choice? Lou swallowed hard, trying to hold herself together as Tim raged. She didn't want to fight. She didn't want to add more noise to the storm. But inside, she was breaking. Jack's will wasn't just a legal document, it was a message. And that message had left her wondering if she had ever truly known the father she had trusted all her life. The silence didn't last. Tim's anger was too loud, and Lou's grief too heavy. What had started as quiet tension quickly turned into sparks that lit the whole room on fire. Tim slammed his hand against the table, his voice raw with rage. "I gave him everything I had left, and he still thought I was nothing." His words tore through the air, sharp and unforgiving. Lou's head snapped up, her eyes wet but steady. "Don't you dare make this about you alone, Tim. Do you think you're the only one he overlooked? Do you think you're the only one who mattered to him?" Her voice cracked at the edges, not from anger but from betrayal. That was the difference. Between them, Tim burned hot, while Lou's pain cut deep and cold. But together, their emotions clashed like thunder against lightning. Tim glared at her, his jaw tight. "You don't get it, Lou. He never trusted me. Not once. And this disproves it." Lou shot back, her voice trembling with both fury and sorrow. "And what about me? I gave up everything to keep Heartland alive. I thought he saw that. I thought he believed in me. But this will. It feels like he didn't. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but no one noticed. The weight of old wounds was dragging them down, pulling years of buried resentment back to the surface. Tim's words turned bitter. Maybe he knew you weren't as perfect as you wanted him to think. Lou's face hardened, her hurt flashing into anger. And maybe he saw through you, Tim. Maybe he knew you'd never change. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as if Jack's spirit was still there, watching his children tear each other apart. What was meant to be a family's final moment of unity had turned into a battlefield of voices, each one desperate to prove their worth to a man who could no longer answer. By the time the shouting stopped, the damage was already done. Tim and Lou weren't just furious at Jack's choices, they were furious at each other. Jack's will hadn't just divided property. It had cracked open the fragile bonds that held the Bartlett family together. When the shouting faded, only silence remained. It was the kind of silence that lingers heavy in the chest, the kind that makes you question everything you thought you knew. For Tim and Lou, the will felt like betrayal. But what if Jack's decisions were not mistakes at all? What if every choice was deliberate, carrying a meaning no one could see yet? Jack Bartlett was never careless. Every decision he made, whether it was about the ranch, the family, or life itself, was always guided by something deeper. He wasn't a man of quick tempers or rash actions. He was a teacher, though not in the traditional sense. His lessons didn't come in classrooms. They came in the way he lived, in the hard truths he shared, and sometimes in the silence he left behind. So, could his will be one last lesson? Perhaps Jack knew that giving Heartland directly to Lou would trap her in a burden she already carried. Maybe he wanted her to learn to let go, to trust others, to share the weight instead of holding it all herself. And Tim, maybe Jack's choice wasn't rejection, but challenge. Maybe by withholding what Tim thought he wanted most, Jack was forcing him to find his worth in something greater than inheritance, the gifts to outsiders, the strange decisions that didn't seem to make sense. Were they symbols? Reminders that Heartland wasn't just about bloodlines and family ties, but about community, about the bonds that reached beyond one family's name. The more one thought about it, the more the will felt less like a division of property and more like a map. A map to something Jack wanted them to discover, not in land, but in themselves. But the tragedy was this: Jack wasn't here to explain it. His absence made every word feel like a riddle, every choice like a locked door without a key. And now, it was up to those he left behind, Tim, Lou, and the rest of the family, to decide. Would they see Jack's will as betrayal, or as the final test of the values he had spent his life teaching them? The lawyer's voice had gone quiet, the papers stacked neatly on the table as if the chaos of the last hour could be packed away in tidy folders. But nothing about this moment was tidy. The Bartlett family was splintered, their grief sharpened into anger, their love twisted into suspicion. And yet, hanging over all of it was the shadow of Jack himself. Every corner of Heartland carried his presence, the old barn he built with his bare hands, the worn saddle still resting where he left it, the silence of the ranch at dawn that always seemed to echo his wisdom. He was gone, but somehow his choices were louder than his voice had ever been. Tim stared at the floor, fists tight, still burning with the sting of rejection. Lou sat rigid, her eyes glassy but distant, her thoughts chasing a father she no longer understood. Between them stretched a gulf wider than ever, and Jack's will had dug that divide deeper. But beneath the pain, a single question refused to fade. Why did Jack do this? Was it punishment? A cruel reminder of their failures? Or was it something else, something none of them could see yet? Perhaps Jack's final act was not meant to break them, but to force them to confront truths they'd been avoiding their whole lives. Perhaps his will was not the end of his story, but the beginning of theirs. The air around them seemed charged, as though Jack himself was still in the room, watching, waiting, daring them to figure it out. And that is where the story leaves us, with a family divided, a legacy uncertain, and a question that hangs like a storm cloud over Heartland. Did Jack Bartlett betray the people he loved most? Or did he leave behind one final lesson powerful enough to change them forever? The answer lies not in the words of the will, but in what happens next. Night settled over Heartland like a heavy curtain, the kind of darkness that doesn't comfort but presses in, making every shadow feel alive. The ranch stood silent, but inside, hearts were anything but still. Tim retreated into anger, Lou into sorrow, and yet both carried the same unshakable weight. Jack's will had changed everything. The land itself seemed to whisper his presence, the creak of the barn door, the distant cry of a horse, the rustle of wind in the trees. Jack was gone, but the choices he made clung to every corner of the ranch. His absence wasn't empty. It was filled with questions no one could answer. Tim wandered outside, staring into the dark horizon. For him, it wasn't just about what Jack left behind, it was about what he didn't. Every word in that will replayed like a ghost in his mind, a cruel reminder that no matter how hard he fought, Jack's approval had slipped away with him. Yet, beneath the rage, a quieter truth gnawed at Tim. Maybe Jack hadn't rejected him. Maybe Jack was daring him to rise higher than he ever had before. Lou, on the other hand, sat in the quiet of the house, the documents spread before her like pieces of a broken puzzle. She touched the pages as if they might speak, as if hidden between the lines there was a clue, a final note of reassurance that she hadn't been forgotten, that her sacrifices hadn't been in vain. But the words stayed cold, and Lou was left, staring into the silence, wondering if she had ever truly known her father at all. And so the Bartlett family stood divided, each carrying their own version of the truth. Was Jack's will an act of betrayal? Or was it his last attempt to force them to grow, to see beyond themselves, to protect the legacy of Heartland in ways they hadn't yet imagined? The answers are buried with Jack. All that remains is the storm he left behind. As the night deepens, one truth becomes clear: Heartland will never be the same again.